The course was received by a woman who was I could never remember if she was a psychologist or a psychiatrist or both. Psychologist at Columbia University, I think it was. And her immediate supervisor, and they would argue with each other about various things. And her name was Helen Schuchman, and her supervisor's name was Robert Thetford. And when they were arguing about various things relative to psychology, I would assume, that finally one of them, and I, for some reason I'm thinking it was Helen, said there must be a better way. And I think it was like the next day or something after she made that statement, she started receiving this channeling, this information. And it was presented to her as a representation of Jesus. And I think she had difficulty trying to accept it for a while. I think her background religiously, although she was, I think, non-religious at the time, but was Jewish. And
she was an atheist.
Yeah, at the time she was.
But her background was Jewish.
Yeah.
So at any rate, she started receiving this information, and she started taking it down, I think, in her shorthand. And it was later translated. This would have been in about 68, I think, when it started.
It took her 7 years.
Yeah.
To
receive all this information.
Everything, yeah.
And so this is the result of it, and what this is, although it's got some addendums that she received after this book was done, but the principles of the book were put down into 3 basic parts. And the first was called the Course in Miracles, the text, and then it was the workbook for practical application, and then there was a teacher's manual and clarification of terms. Right now we're into the teacher's manual because we've been doing this. Well, this group, there have been since 2004, I think, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. 20 years.
And so a couple of the original members, and I went to, I think, one meeting in 2004 when I was out to visit Tom and Linda before we moved here, and then Patty and I came to a meeting in February of 2005. And then we moved here in May of 2005, been coming ever since. So the group was led by Tom and Linda Carpenter, and if you want a real good book, there's one called Dialogue on Awakening by Tom Carpenter, because he is also a channel of Jesus. And there's a little bit of explanation at the introduction of how that happened for him.
His book is on Amazon.
Brandon, I think there's an extra book of that in the...
I just gave it away.
Did you?
Yeah.
I've given all mine away too. So.
However,
Tom and Linda might have extra.
I do have the extra copy of this book that was in that box, and you can have it if you'd like it. And I think it's in my bag.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, that might be good so they could follow along a little.
And I took the extra book that you guys had in there and gave it to him.
Good.
But he didn't know he was coming today, so he didn't.
Thank you.
Could have played something right before we did.
Just my personal opinion. Start with the workbook.
What book?
The workbook. Okay. Yeah. Because the text is like, it's really expansive and it cannot be losing. But the workbook, just one a day.
I don't want to ask him.
The manual for teachers is pretty easy to understand. I think it's not a bad introduction to the whole thing.
I was still teaching, so when it came out, when I first got into it, that's the first thing I went to. I thought, well, you don't do a curriculum, you don't do a you don't go and walk into a classroom without knowing the manual for teachers and the manual for the book you're going to teach so that you can teach it right. So that was the first thing I went to, was the manual for teachers. But it was overwhelming a little bit.
Just a little.
And there is a book called The Course Made Easy. And a lot of people really like that. And
Yeah.
That's by Ellen Cohen.
And there's some supplements in the later editions here that I don't have in mind, but there's a song of prayer, psychotherapy, and one other one I think that's in there on healing or something.
Well, and it wasn't, I don't know, you probably heard of it, Edgar Casey.
Yep.
Wasn't that foundation part of at one time
No,
with the course, or
they took a copy of it to
took a copy of it?
Hugh Lynn Casey,
Right.
Edgar Casey's son,
Right.
Okay.
to see what he thought about it.
Okay.
And
Couldn't quite remember.
that was the original version of the course. It's slightly different from this one.
Well, it was
Okay.
one of the original edited versions
Yeah.
versus what she received, and then there's been a number of other editions. One called the Urtext, which has a lot of Helen's notes and things they didn't put in here, and then Robert Perry did an edition of this that I enjoy too. That's got a lot of her Helen's notes and other explanations in it. But the idea of this. And I'll ask everyone else to help me out with this because I'm sure I'm going to need some help doing it. But it's basically that we have the world backwards, kind of. That this world is rather upside down. That there was a break, a split in the mind of the Son of God that thought it could create its own world. And outside of God, basically.
And the Son of God being all of us.
And that's part of this split, is we are representations of this split mind, of this. And I liken it, and others have, to the Big Bang, where everything just blew apart and then had to try to work its way back together again, piece by piece, that we're in that process. And as each one of us looks at our world from our own perspectives, we think it's the whole world because we think our perspective is true, because we can't see another person's perspective. Not really, not from inside their mind. What this tells us is that the minds are all connected. At one level, the minds are all connected, and we're moving toward that joining, toward that connection. But it allows for the whole process. And it talks about the ego as this idea of the separated mind. Of this ego that I am me and nobody else can be me. I'm special. And then we make a tacit agreement that you're special too because nobody else can be you. And then we live our lives. I liken it to a Shakespeare play where we all have agreement on the stage and the set, but we all seem to come at the script from a different perspective. So I'm oversimplifying this, and help me out, anybody, if
I would have renamed it. I would have called it A Course in Forgiveness, because I think that every page of every chapter of every part of it is inviting us to find happiness by forgiving other people rather than judging and condemning other people. Those are the only two options. When we look at people, there's nothing neutral. I either condemn it or I love it. And so to call it A Course in Love, to me, makes sense because it's about learning how to love
Unconditionally.
and learning how to love people right where they are now.
Yeah, it's
Not how they
accepting.
ought to be, where they are now. And if we can do that, I think we're home. We're safe. We're good to go.
Well, the Course's definition of forgiveness, too, is important, I think. It's like Tom says. The Course says this is all a big play, and we're the actors They're not the characters in the play. So forgiveness is realizing that, and realizing that nobody needs to be forgiven for anything. The world's idea of forgiveness is, you did this to me, but I'm going to forgive you for it. The Course's idea of forgiveness is, nobody ever did anything to anybody, it's all a big play.
Nobody did anything to anybody that needs forgiveness.
Right.
That's the approach that the Course seems to say to me. In other words, you're perfect just like you are. I am too.
And the idea, thanks, Jim, for going there, because that's the key of the whole Course, is the idea of forgiveness. And it's the idea, too, that if we forgive someone or everyone, since our minds are all connected, in a sense, we're forgiving an aspect of ourselves, always. Because if we think about it from a practical standpoint, if we think we have to forgive anyone else, then we've judged them. So we're forgiving our own judgment of them when we think we're forgiving them.
The shortest sentence in the Course in Miracles books is 2 words: judge not. You could read that. If you got it, throw the book away. You're home.
We've also judged ourselves, though.
Oh, yeah.
The other person.
But it says judge not.
It means we've judged them. It's also that we've judged ourselves that we can be harmed. So we can actually be like permanently harmed when actually what we truly are isn't harmed.
Well, because we're all one, if you judge anybody, you're judging yourself.
Yes.
That's why so many of us feel like we're unloved and unlovable, because we spend our whole life judging other people, condemning them, like Jim says.
And we recognize that at a certain level, that we have judged others, because we've created our whole world as a separate world with separate people by judging and classifying and categorizing. Everything we seem to think outside of ourselves is a projection of our own mind as to how we judge it. Because if you think about it, otherwise they're just events. Until we judge them, they are events without judgment.
Don't you see the forgiveness? I mean, when I feel forgiveness in the Course, it feels to me like what you just described, Tom, is the forgiveness is really of that entire thing.
About what?
Of forgiving that entire thing, the entire projection. It's just seeing clearly.
Yeah.
It's just a clear sight.
Mm-hmm.
And in that clear sight, there just isn't even an engagement in the mind of all the storylines of who did what to who, or what happened in the world, or what it's all about, or it's just a clear seeing moment to moment to moment.
The Course makes it a point to tell us often that what we're picturing is a process in front of us that we have not wanted within ourselves, so we projected it outside of ourselves. So this allows us to judge because we've really already judged it in ourselves and found we didn't want it there. And so we projected it out into a world that includes all sorts of heinous acts and wars and everything else, along with a lot of loving acts and a lot of joining. And it tells us that the only things we will retain from this basic illusion that we all see from a special angle is every loving thought we've ever had about anyone, or every loving thought they've had about us. Everything else is just stuff given to, and the means to do this is the Holy Spirit. So you give it to the Holy Spirit, and there's a part in the Course where it talks about the mind is the altar to the Father and to the Son, to God and to Christ, or how you view it. In this case, this is based on Christ, and it has quotes from the Bible, but it also says that mankind, in essence, has kind of interpreted the Bible the way mankind wanted to many times, and had a hellfire interpretation that is not part of what this represents as love. Anyway, that the means is through the Holy Spirit, where everything that we see, if we're not going to judge it, then how are we going to make any sense of it at all? Well, the Course tells us that every encounter is either a loving encounter or what appears to be a non-loving encounter, which is, according to the Course, simply a call for help or a call for love. So everything we perceive is one of those two things. There's no neutrality involved. It's either we are in a mood where we are nothing but the love that we were created as, or we believe in the separation and the judgment. Well, the way to deal with this world, since we think we're in it, we believe this is the only world. And most of us still here, after all these years of studying, I would probably have to admit that we still do believe we're in this world. We turn it over to what can be judged by the Holy Spirit, which does judge. And it judges between truth and illusion. And the best concept I have of that is it judges from a standpoint of wholeness or separation. And everything that includes the whole, that is all-inclusive, the all-inclusive mind, is whole, and that represents truth. Anything that is separate, that thinks it's whole, outside of that oneness of the Holy Spirit, which we can't conceive of down here because we already think we're in separate bodies, which gets a major part of all of this. Anything else, then we have to consider as probably illusion. The point is we can't judge. So what we do is we put it onto this Holy Spirit. I physically kind of go up in the air because that's the way things seem to work in a world with gravity and everything. But we place on this altar, which is nothing more than the mind with the Holy Spirit, altar to the Father and the Son, and the idea is that truth and illusion cannot be in the same place at the same time, because it's like light and darkness being in the same place at the same time. If you have light and darkness in the same place at the same time, darkness disappears. So if you have truth and illusion in the same place at the same time, illusion disappears. That brings us into time. And time is where we think we are. And time is what keeps us from putting truth and illusion in the same place in the eternal now. Because we can have thoughts now at 1 minute and have an opposing thought the next minute, and we can deal with both of them as if it's true. But in the same instant, we cannot have opposing thoughts in that same instant. And that's what we're talking about, giving it to the Holy Spirit.
So maybe to make a lot of this simpler, we're living in the illusion that this is not real. This life of physical form is not real. It's the play that Tom was talking about. So right in the beginning of the Course, it says, nothing real can be threatened. Well, look around you. Can anything be threatened here? Everything. Nothing unreal exists. So none of this really exists. It's all like an illusion, a big dream, of course, is a game. Herein lies the peace of God. To know that nothing unreal exists and to know that nothing real can be threatened, that's where the peace of God is.
You'll find the introduction to the Course, or I find the introduction. I go back periodically and read the introduction of the Course because it really does a nice job of key elements in a very clear way.
Are you talking about the introduction or the preface?
No, maybe it's the preface.
That paragraph you mean, or what's saying? What
Yeah,
it is
it's all
and
the
how it
preface.
came and
The
all
preface.
Yeah.
The introduction is a one-page thing that states the basic premise of it is what Brian just said. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. And it's all about the idea that we've already chose separation, and the symbol of separation is our bodies. That's the ultimate. I must be separate from you because you're there and I'm here. So we put our identities in these bodies, and we've given our identities to a separation thought called the ego, which has given us the idea of a body where we think we live. This is a split mind that chose the separation to begin with and is still choosing it now. What makes us still choose it now is our total amnesia of what we had as oneness before, which comes with the idea of separation. So this is
we're not these bodies. And if you read anything about people who have had near-death experiences, and I've read a ton, just about everything I could find on that, we continue on after these bodies die. We're not these bodies. We're just traveling around in them. I love what the channeler Lazarus says. Saying that I am my body is like saying that my teenage son is his car. Yeah. He's just driving around in it.
Well, if you think about it, which body are we?
Yeah.
The one that was born, the one that was 2 years old, the one that was 10 years old, which one are we?
Yeah.
The one that appears to die? So it makes no sense to say our identity is a body when we can't even project an image of a body that represents us for the whole period of our time within the play.
But outside of bodies, aren't our spirits different?
The course,
because body one thing, spirit another. I agree. Body is, very transient, right? Yes, but your spirit, you are different from universe, from God. You have individual spirit.
You're the individualized part of God. If you see it that way, the spirit is eternal, right? So it doesn't die when I die or you die. But it's the part of God that is love. So another word for spirit is love. And if you think of it as love, it's a lot easier to get the whole idea of how to live without pain. And the way is to offer only love and to refuse to accept any attack from anyone. You can look at it differently, and if you look at it differently, then you are no longer hurt by what someone does.
There's a way to look at this too, as the Course from beginning to end is a progression of sorts. It initially starts talking about lower order reality, which later it calls illusion, which is this world we think we're in. It starts talking about the soul, and then moves into talking about spirit. And at the end it tries to say both are exactly the same. But in lower order reality, they're not quite. Because, as you say, and we do equate spirit and soul. Here's my interpretation of that. That the soul is the part of God that is within us as we, with our mind, chose the illusion. The mind is supposed to be at the service of spirit, which is the idea of unconditional love. But when we chose separation, we chose the mind to be at service of a special self called the ego, which means basically I want to be special outside of the wholeness of God. Now, what's difficult is the idea, well, wait a minute, are the souls different? And I would maintain, yes, they are. At the lower order reality, every soul is different from every other because it is the living force that allows the ego within the illusion even to survive and think it's alive. But the ego is a strange animal. It's like a character in a play. It's like it doesn't have the ability to rewrite its own play from the basic idea of oneness, of joining. It's stuck in a character in the play. It expands as the soul, through the ego, experiences more. There's one definition I kind of liked about it, is that God is from all knowing to all experiencing to all being. And the idea of that separation, or the Big Bang, is the experiential part. And that's the part we're in now. So we all came from the creation by God, as the Son of God, as all-knowing. But it's the idea of, what do we know? What does that mean? Know what? In relation to what else? So now we're moving into a period of all experiencing, where we appear to experience separation. But what we're really experiencing is a form, in a sense, of division. If you can completely divide and divide and divide, you're going to infinite division, into meaningless, into chaos. And that has got to be reconciled, or brought back. It'd be like saying death is real. And what the Course says is death is not real. That every one of these journeys that we're on is destined to return. Another way to look at it is, every possible choice for crucifixion includes with it the attached choice for resurrection. And that's through the Holy Spirit. And it's inevitable. What the Course says is, we don't have any control about whether we do it or not. The only thing we can do is delay, by playing within the illusions.
So this is Edgar Casey's drawing, and it's in that handout that I gave you. It shows how we're all connected. There is only one mind, and here's each one of us down here. All
Let me
connected.
see, Brian. Let us see over
That
here.
way, there you go.
Yeah, I was going to say, one way I think of it is being like, because it's a paradox, they're both true. You're asking, do we have a spirit separate from God? The real fundamental truth beneath all truths is there's no separation, period. There's just a oneness. There's just one being that appears as many. But it's like, the way, if I get an image of it, it's a lot like this image that Brian has, because I think of it, one of the ways I think of it is like the sun. Well, and the Course speaks many times about the nature of love being extension, that love extends itself. And God is love, we are extension of God's love. So it's, because what our real nature is that love. And that's all it knows how to do. Love in its really pure form just extends out, it extends to itself. So it's like the sun has many rays, you could say. You could say it's like, okay, so if I'm a ray of the sun, did I cease to be the sun? Not really. I'm still the sun, but there's this ray and this ray and this ray, or petals of a flower. Does each individual petal, are they, because they're a petal, are they no longer a flower? You can't really pull it apart. You see what I'm saying? So that's one way that I look at it, and that's what I see here. It's like the same thing. It's like all one body of essence, and these kind of poke out and like, I do essence like this. Well, this one does it like that, But it's all the same. Yeah.
And perhaps a good way to try to explain it would be the idea of a hologram, where, for instance, you can take a piece of film from a holographic photo and just clip a little piece of that negative and shine lights, laser lights through it in a certain way, and it reproduces the whole picture. And that's maybe a way to look at each individual soul.
Let me ask you this. What's your take on evil? Does it exist? Is it illusion? Because I heard about God and love and illusion, but where's evil? What is it? Does it exist or not?
Can I answer that?
Yeah.
My view Evil is just live spelled backwards. We either live or we're doing it backwards. And so what we call evil, what the ego calls evil, is hurting what I care about. Not necessarily hurting what you guys care about, hurting what I care about. And so evil is simply a perception that what's eternal can die. I mean, if you take that idea that we are the eternal child of God, but we can die. I mean, you just killed the first part of the sentence with the last three words. We are the eternal child of God, but we can die. Okay, now, that's not going to fly. Either or. And that's what the world is. It's the either or place where we choose to be loving. We learn, I think, how to love. And as we learn how to love, we will find that we have less and less we condemn. And if we keep that up, we'll condemn nothing, we'll condemn no one.
If this is all illusion, if this is all a play, then evil does not exist. It exists within the play, yes. But you know, when we go to see a horror movie, The Shining or something like that, you know, do we condemn the actor? No. We know it's just acting. We know it's not real. So evil in the play is real, but not in reality.
But then you say, okay, so he's acting. So is there a puppet master behind everybody who makes you to play this role, this role, or this role? Or is there a free will that you can actually choose, good side or bad side?
That's the fundamental question throughout the ages back to Plato, isn't it? Free will.
Very, very good.
Yeah. That is the question.
You know, that's basically Catholic doctrine, that we are given free will, and the world is as it is, because God is not a puppet master. We are not playing roles, we make choices. And we can choose for good or we can choose for bad. And God is not going to take our free will, because He would make us automata. We would be, no fun, just machines doing, and He expects us to choose good. And that's the essence, at least in Catholic doctrine, of good life. Choose good, choose be on the God side.
If you look at the word sin in its native language, it means without. That's all it means. So we can see sin as being without kindness or without love, without.
God.
So every sin is being without what we really are. And what really are we? We're love.
There you go. I think that's it in a nutshell. The Course talks about the idea of, fundamentally, it all boils down to who created me. The ego says, I created you, meaning I created myself. What this is saying is that God created you.
Love created you, another way of saying it.
In other words, unconditional, all-inclusive love, made manifest in mind and nothing else. That's our creation. Now, within that, the Son of God did have free will and does. And the free will allows the Son to dream. For instance, you could ask the question, if I'm the Son of God, well, what am I? Father, what am I? You are love. You are everything. You are all-inclusive. Is there anything I am not? You're all-inclusive. Well, is there anything outside of love? No, love encompasses everything. Well, what if there was something outside of love? What would that look like? Well, it would look like something less than everything. It would look like something that's a piece of everything that thinks it's everything, but it's wrong, because it is everything. So it would be a loss of memory, a loss of mind, of knowing of everything. And then the Son could say, well, I wonder what that's like. You tell me I'm all-powerful, and I am everything, I can do everything. So I should be able to have that too, and see what it's like. So the free will was also for the Son to choose, to dream that it was not God. And that's the dream we appear to be in.
Actually, when Tom talked about the introduction, it does mention free will in the introduction. And it says that free will does not mean that you can establish the curriculum. It only means that you can elect what you want to take at any given time.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, it does say the script is written. But the script is written. But it also says that the Holy Spirit will take any decision we make and use it for our own good. So maybe we made a wrong decision, but the Holy Spirit, who's interested in waking all of us up, will use it to do that.
I think it's such a beautiful, penetrating question, though, the one about what about evil? And I just wonder, I really dove into that my first year and second year of course study, because I just had to understand, but what about because I had come in contact through some life experiences with certain people that suffered being raised by families that practice satanic ritual, and I mean these things that are just, you want to talk about evil, we can talk evil, and so I just was so desperate, in my calling to Jesus to understand this. But what about this? And I'd go to Borders books, and I'd go to the true crime section and read about, just the most horrendous Ted Bundy stuff. Just, I've got to understand. I have to look this in the face. I can't just be here, oh, it's all love, and it's all okay, it's all illusion. Well, I want to look it really in the face. If I had that kind of experience, if that was my neighbor, or my relative, or how would I be feeling about that? Would I just be able to just read these things here and go, there's no such thing as evil? So I, in my desperation to understand, really was in one of those almost to tears, just please help me with this, talking to Jesus. And he just kind of told me to just, close your eyes, sit back. And what I was saying to him at the time was, I know if some guy came in here, and at that time my kids were little babies in the room, having their nap, and I was like, and was going to kill my babies. Man, I'd get a hold of my own axe and I'd go ape on that guy, probably if I could. Would I just sit there and just let him come in and do whatever? That feels totally against my nature. And that's what I was saying to Jesus, and I was really... So he told me to just sit back, close your eyes. So I did. And the quandary in me was, there's that picture of pick up my own axe, defend all those things, or don't do anything. Just be complete stillness and don't respond and let what happens happen, right? So when I sat back and closed my eyes, suddenly there was this axe. It was a vision, and this axe came right and just splattered right into my chest. But it was like it's almost like the me that was there just shattered into nothing. And it was like showing me that, okay, so now what do you think? Now what is your? And it was like this just could not be. What he wanted me to see more than anything was that what I really am could not be touched. It just could not be touched. So what will happen, and the feeling was what will happen is what will happen. You'll do what you do. Someone else does what they do. And it's all according to what's already being projected onto the canvas of life. The evil is
like
projection.
the body.
It rises
the
out
body
of
can be
projection.
destroyed, but you have not been
But
touched.
I was not, and that was
Your
the most
spirit.
important thing that he wanted me to get, was it's not,
Yeah.
I'm not going to find the answer in digging through more stories of evil. And
Right.
It's more, yeah.
Can you have any story of ego if we don't identify as a body?
Story of what?
Evil.
Oh, I thought you said ego.
Maybe I did.
Well, who cares,
They both
Put them
work.
in the same boat.
They both do work, but I meant to say ego.
No, and
evil.
it's also where like if we concentrate on that so much, it's almost like then giving a lot of energy to that field, that kind of a development in the projected field, right? So it's also just kind of brought me back to center, like, oh,
I wonder if we don't want to remember too.
This is what's important, you know.
Evil is the opposite of love, which is fear.
Right.
So when we assume to see evil, we're just having that fear. And to let go of that fear is a major thing. To let go of the fear that just to let go of the fear. Whatever it encompasses, whatever it might look like for each and every one of us. Because we all have our own little thing that is fearsome.
If you focus on it, you focus on the fear, you're going to bring that to you.
Yeah.
Yes.
You're going to bring all that stuff.
Yeah.
You focus on love, that's what you're going to see. That's what we want to see. We want to see with Christ's eyes.
Yes.
So I just read a book, a very intellectual treatise on exactly what you're talking about, Reverend. He says, if there is an all-loving God, how can there be evil? And if there is evil, how can there be an all-loving God? And it's a very intellectual book. It uses logic throughout it, but it takes the Course in Miracles point of view to explain all of that. And I wish I had it here where I could tell you in a minute or so, but it took me a month to read the book. But anybody who'd be interested in reading that book, I'll bring it in here.
I'm curious to see it, Brian. Would you bring it?
Yeah, I brought it before, but I can't remember. I can't remember the name. Evil is part of the name of the book. I can't remember it all.
I ask myself whenever I think I'm being fearful, I say to Jim, what part of this dream do you insist is real?
Yeah.
And it just blows it out.
Yeah.
It's gone.
Right. Yeah.
That fast.
It's
What
either
part of
truth
the
or
dream
illusion.
Yeah.
It can't
do
be
you
both.
insist is real? Oh, that part where they're killing all those kids. I'm special about, that. And so that's the part I think is real. Oh, well, is any part of any dream real?
No.
Well, no.
See, the other thing, the Course talks about what is to replace the illusory worlds we all think we see. And we all usually think we're seeing the same world. And we're not, because we all have a different perspective of what we think we're seeing, and that's the judgment coming in. But it says that there is a real world to replace the one that we see. And this world was created by God, but is also not a final step. It's a stepping stone to what it calls knowledge, where we are one with God when God takes the final step to bring us to God, where presumably we are totally without judgment and totally trusting in God and having faith in God. And this idea of unconditional, all-inclusive love is what our identity is. That is what we are.
But we've created all these beliefs and all these thoughts. And then we have to look at them, because we're talking about, we have to get rid of the blocks that are blocking us from the love that we are. And that's what this whole book, you're going to look at that.
It is.
And that's why, and it's a process. And
It says it about 12 times, but in one of those 12 times, you'll hear it.
You'll hear it. That's right.
And
like,
maybe the other 11 times it just goes right by you. But in that 12th time you go, oh, I finally see what it's saying. And it's saying there's nothing to fear.
when we first started this book, I started it, 20 years ago or so. The only thing that I got out of it was I was at such peace. And it said things that were beautiful. And I loved what it said. Didn't know what it meant. But that was okay, because when I read it, I was at peace and felt good. Now I've read it, and I've read it, and I've read it. And the more peaceful I am in my life, and the more love that has come into my life, and so it's a process.
We've practiced too. It's not just the reading, you've practiced the
I
workbook lessons. That's the thing, is actually putting things into application.
Right.
It's not meant to be theoretical, it's meant to
Yeah.
be put into application. Yeah.
Yeah. So the blocks to our awareness of love's presence, the biggest one is what Jim was talking about, judgment, which the Course defines the word judgment as condemnation.
Say it again.
Condemnation.
Oh, condemnation.
So when I condemn someone, I'm judging them. Could even be me. So the blocks to that are fear, anger, criticism, blame, shame, guilt, resentment, judgment. All those things are symptoms of fear. So there is only love and fear, the Course says. So symptoms of love would be forgiveness, compassion, understanding, acceptance, those kinds of things.
But judgment, I agree that we shouldn't judge people. We should love everybody without exception. But how can we get by not condemning certain ideas? Because, there are some very, despicable ideas in the world, phenomena. And there are people behind it, but we should strive not to hate people for doing that. I agree with that. That's, again, doctrine of Catholic Church. We are not condemning people, but we are definitely condemning certain ideas. Despicable ideas that exist.
I have a word that works real well for me for that. Can I notice without judging? Notice is, that doesn't seem right, but maybe it is, I don't know. And so in the I don't know-ness, we trust. And in trust to me means I believe in God. God's running the show. Does God have to argue with the devil? Are they equal? Who's in charge? Who's the better guy? All that stuff comes up. But if there's only God, which is love, if there's only love, then everything becomes either love or a call for love. Oh, a call for love. Somebody's murdering somebody. Maybe they have never had love in their whole life. Should I throw them in prison, or should I attempt to talk to them about love?
And can anyone really murder anyone?
No,
Well, that's a whole other. If we are not bodies, and death isn't real, and if this is a play, it does. The key is removing the blocks to the awareness of love's presence. And if the blocks are removed one by one, love is already there. We don't have to go searching for love. Love, this is the basis, again, of what created us. If we are all created by love, by God, as unconditional love, then what we are doing is playing a game that we are not unconditional love. I wonder what that would be like. So there's your ego. We're playing a game about not being whole, not being everything. And as if I can attack another part of myself, well, that other part of myself is also playing the game. But from a different perspective, just as the unified ego maybe wrote a script about all these different things. From my perspective, if you can't have variety, then you can't have all-inclusiveness.
Yes, it is.
So if you can't have the idea of separation to begin with, you can't have the idea of God being all that is. And that's the inclusiveness. Play your game of evil as long as you want, within reason. You're going to come to the recognition of the fact that you did not create yourself. You did not create this character in the play. You joined a character in a play that is probably eternal possibilities. You just picked one. And now you've got free will within the play. In my mind, the only total free will is within God. But within the play, we have limited free will. And that's what the Course talks about. You can delay as long as you want. And you can choose between this illusion and this illusion. But as long as you want to do that, you're not choosing between truth and illusion. You're just choosing between illusions. We don't have the ability within the play, as the character, to know what truth is, because it is so all-encompassing. It involves an abstract mind above and beyond consciousness. We cannot deal from a conscious perspective with this abstract mind of God or the Son of God, because all-inclusiveness is like saying you have a giant tub of soup the size of the world, and it includes every possible thing that the world has ever had in it. And now, what am I? As soon as you pick one piece of corn in there, you've lost the abstract mind and you've moved into becoming that. And you have to have an ability that we can't have as long as we think we're bodies. But we have within us the Holy Spirit that represents God to us, to all who think they're separated, until we come back to this knowing and being the Son of God ourselves. This is the only truth within us that can deal with each other when we know we're dealing with something that's true in the other, that's beyond the bodies. And bodies aren't involved in that case because you're just connected. The minds are connected in a loving connection of some kind, of just knowing. And it's the Holy Spirit in each one, recognizing the Holy Spirit in the other, or God recognizing God, or the Son of God recognizing the Son of God, or the true meaning of namaste, however you want to look at that.
I think
Shall we read?
I think too that what Teddy said about the peace she feels from this course. There's several of us in here who've been doing this for over 20 or 30 years. For some reason we keep doing it. It just rings true to me. I don't know why that is that it rings true to me, but it does.
Okay, well, I didn't mind going there because I think it does all of us a lot of good to kind of review what this all means to us, what is the idea, the fundamental idea behind us studying this course and meeting once a week and different perspectives on it. And we haven't done more than scratch the surface here.
And I really appreciate your questions because I think they.
Thank you.
I feel that they're the questions that you're asking are the fuel that drive us. It's the same questions, and it is that relationship with God. And I'd love to have a conversation. So you asked, is there evil? My perspective, no. And I've had this discussion before, and it's just so rich in exploring what that is. There's in my sense of the further distant I am from my relationship with God, living relationship with God, the more my behavior is going to act out in ways that says that I'm the unworthy one of the distance from God. The closer I am to God, there's no problem loving an enemy because there is no enemy. They are me.
The key premise here too is that we project what is in our mind. And it's the idea of we're going to see what we expect to see. If we're trying to identify evil, to fix it even, or especially maybe, we're going to find it.
Yeah.
Because that's what we're looking for. If all we want to do is find the love in the world, that's what we're going to be looking for. And that's when we go to the gas station and see somebody and make eye contact, we're going to realize it's there. When we see little ones, newborns and everything else, it just seems to be there. It draws us right in. But we're going to find it almost everywhere we look. And it's then when we're looking for only love, that if something does come along that doesn't appear to be loving, hopefully we remember that must be a call for love. Behind that is love. Behind that character in the play acting out is the love which created the actor. Let's go. Let's go to the teacher's manual. That manual for teachers.
It's way in the back.
Yes.
Way in the back.
Let's say teachers on the top.
Manual for teachers.
It says manual for teachers.
Up here, you say it at the top.
Manual for teachers.
What
Okay, look
page?
at page 14.
14.
Lesson 14 or page?
Page 14.
And
Are we on
manual for
14?
teachers.
Did we do through joy? I didn't know.
Okay.
Faithfulness, is that,
Faithfulness.
we're at faithfulness, I believe, which is on page
Where are we at, Tom?
15. Is that what you got?
I thought we went all the way through joy.
To joy?
Through which one?
Through joy?
Yeah, that's what I
Through
thought.
joy.
Yeah. I've got a big green line around faithfulness, like start here.
No, we
No,
didn't.
that's
We didn't
not
do.
it.
No,
We did that.
No, we didn't do that. That's what we're going to do.
No, I don't know how to
We're going to do
do
the fences thing. We didn't do anything.
Oh, okay.
No, I don't think we did any of this.
Defenselessness, the top of the page, 14. Yep.
Okay,
You want me to
I do.
start?
If you would, please.
Okay, defenseless.
I'm sorry. I'm going to interrupt you here. What we're doing is we're reading in the Manual for Teachers the characteristics of the teachers for God. So these are the characteristics, and it says advanced teachers of God, which makes me feel good, because otherwise I figure I'm not a teacher for God because I don't exemplify these things. It says advanced teachers of God. These are the characteristics that they have. It makes generalizations here. It's not trying to be all-inclusive in these things. It's giving us some of the more fundamental ideas or ideals of what the Course calls a teacher for God. So we've covered in the first one is trust, and it talks about trust, and that seems to move through levels of trust, as all of us have probably experienced, as how much do we trust what our ideology is. And then it goes through honesty and tolerance and gentleness and joy. And we've covered those. So we're now and there's 10 total, in a sense, similar to the 10 Commandments. Interestingly, there's nothing about the 10 Commandments in here being part of this book. But interestingly enough, there are 10 characteristics of advanced teacher of God. So the Course doesn't make demands about us, because then it would be closer to the ego. But it does offer guidance. But it tells us that we have to ask for the guidance because it will not be forced upon us. If guidance is forced upon us, it's no longer guidance, it's tyranny. And that's why it's saying there's our free will within the dream about when we want to actually ask for guidance to get out of it. Okay.
Okay, defenselessness. God's teachers have learned how to be simple. They have no dreams that need defense against the truth. They do not try to make themselves. Their joy comes from their understanding who created them. And does what God created need defense? No one can become an advanced teacher of God until he fully understands that defenses are but foolish guardians of mad illusions. The more grotesque the dream, the fiercer and more powerful its defenses seem to be. Yet, when the teacher of God finally agrees to look past them, he finds that nothing was there. Slowly at first, he lets himself be undeceived. But he learns faster as his trust increases. It is not danger that comes when defenses are laid down. It is safety, it is peace, it is joy, and it is God.
So here it goes to the idea again that foolish guardians of mad illusions, that's ourselves and our ego worlds that we created, each for ourselves. And it says that will all be laid by, it'll be let go. And in other places here it says that all we will retain from that will be every loving thought we had or anyone had about us, which is the same ultimately, because cause and effect in one mind are joined. And what's important for me to understand is that whenever I run into an impossible situation, and this world is full of them because it's designed to bring up impossible situations, then I have to say, okay, is this truth or illusion? Here, I'll place it upon the altar. Is this truth or illusion? I don't know. I'm not going to judge it, although it seems impossible. Just show me, is this real or not real? And if it's not a feeling of love, it's just not real. I've made up a story about it in my mind. I've assigned thoughts to other characters in the play that I think they're thinking. And I've made this deal where I'm the victim of this situation, this impossible situation. And either it's true or not. And it's going to ultimately go down to the fact either I'm this body or I'm not. And either God created me or I think I created myself, in which case I'm in deep crap because I don't know how to get out of this dream. And sometimes it's fun, but often it's not.
An example is I shared with a friend that I go hiking up to the waterfalls, and they said, "You go by yourself?" And I said, "Yes, I go by myself." And she said, "Well, aren't you afraid?" I said, "No, I'm not afraid. Why should I be afraid?" So my daughter came, and she's here now, and she went up to the waterfalls, and it was interesting. She went running, she runs, and I got this idea in my head, I hope she's going to be careful. You know, I hope she'll be careful. And it started to get dark. And I thought, gosh, I hope no, let that go. I trust. She's going to be just fine. A few minutes later, I heard, "Mama, I'm back," you know. And I said, I went there, but then I got out of there. I don't want to do that.
Yeah, and that's the key thing, too, is that we don't recognize, if we're all connected, our thoughts of love are shared, but also people can receive our thoughts of fear. And it can make them fearful only if they allow it. Only if they allow it to come in. Just like illness is the same way, sickness. If you're afraid of a disease, you're susceptible to getting that disease. If you're saying, "I don't need it, I have no use for this," it's highly unlikely you're going to get it. So there is some free will in this, and it boils down to what do you want, and it boils down to what am I? What am I? Boils down to who created me. Me or God. Let's go to the text now and keep a marker here where we're at so we can go back to it. But let's go to text, and it's fundamental to what we were talking about earlier. Page 193 in the text. Chapter 11. Yeah, first the introduction of chapter 11. In fact, let's read this introduction because it's only 4 paragraphs long, and I think it's going to address a lot of what we've been talking about here. So another part of this is that there are never any accidents, that nothing happens by chance.
I totally subscribe to it.
Pardon?
I totally subscribe to
Good.
this idea.
Good.
There's no chance.
Yeah. So, Tom, if you would read the first paragraph.
Sure. God or the ego, introduction. either God or the ego is insane. If you will examine the evidence on both sides fairly, you will realize this must be true. Neither God nor the ego proposes a partial thought system. Each is internally consistent, but they are diametrically opposed in all respects, so that partial allegiance is impossible. Remember, too, that their results are as different as their foundations, and their fundamentally irreconcilable natures cannot be reconciled by vacillations between them. Nothing alive is fatherless, for life is creation. Therefore, your decision is always an answer to the question, who is my father? And you will be faithful to the father you choose.
We're going to be faithful to believing that God is our Father, or the idea of God as unconditional, all-inclusive love, or the ego is our Father. The idea of separation and an independent worldview within each of our minds that belongs to us only. And this would lead, again, to just total annihilation if we take it to the limits of total separation. This is the fundamental question.
I think Jesus' statement that I am in the Father and the Father is in me is very much in line with the Course.
Yeah. Betty?
Yet what would you say to someone who believed this question really involves conflict? If you made the ego, how can the ego have made you? The authority problem is still the only source of conflict, because the ego was made out of the wish of God's Son to father him. The ego, then, is nothing more than a delusional system in which you made your own father. Make no mistake about this. It sounds insane when it is stated with perfect honesty, but the ego never looks on what it does with perfect honesty. Yet that is its insane premise, which is carefully hidden in the dark cornerstone of its thought system. And either the ego, which you made, is your father, or its whole thought system will not stand.
Can we see, it may not make sense what I've said, we wanted to be God outside of God. But can you see how this is basically saying that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Teresa?
You make by projection, but God creates by extension. The cornerstone of God's creation is you, for his thought system is light. Remember the rays that are there unseen. The more you approach the center of his thought system, the clearer the light becomes. The closer you come to the foundation of the ego's thought system, the darker and more obscure becomes the way. Yet even the little spark in your mind is enough to lighten it. Bring this light fearlessly with you and bravely hold it up to the foundation of the ego's thought system. Be willing to judge it with perfect honesty. Open the dark cornerstone of terror on which it rests and bring it out into the light. There you will see that it rested on meaninglessness, and that everything of which you have been afraid was based on nothing.
So there's quite a bit in this paragraph. The cornerstone of God's creation is you. In other words, if God created me, then I must be unconditional, all-inclusive love, made manifest in mind, and joined with all other aspects of that mind in a holographic whole. That is the cornerstone.
Like Father, like Son.
Yes. So everything always boils down to what I think I am, what we think we are, which boils down to what created us. And this is the idea that it seems like we have a parent's physical bodies that created us. But it's the idea behind these characters in the play. And it's the idea behind even the ability to have a play, the idea of this oneness, all-inclusive, unconditional love made manifest in mind, allowing the Son to be everything and to dream that it is less than everything. And this is what it says: the closer you come to the foundation of the ego's thought system, which is the foundation of our own dream for each of us, the darker and more obscure becomes the way. This is on purpose. Our egos are fighting for their lives. They want to make it more obscure and darker. And now we get into the idea of the soul. Yet even the little spark in your mind is enough to lighten it. There's not only our soul in spirit, but our mind is also that of the Holy Spirit that is within us. This is the part of us that can relate to every other aspect of the whole. That part of us that allows us to be alive, to believe we can dream, and to have an aspect of ourself that appears to be in one. Another key part of this, which I didn't mention, is that ourselves, a self with a capital S, is still whole and not dreaming. This is an aspect, each of us is an aspect of the mind of that self, split off from the wholeness of that self. And that's hence the idea of the split mind, that thinks it's dreaming. If the self that is our reality, which I look at as a spirit of us, the wholeness of us, when the soul, that's the little spark within us, within this dream, within this aspect of mind, is back to that whole self. If that self tried to bring this soul back with the aspect of mind, or the fragment of mind, it calls it another part of the book, by force, then again there would be no free will, because the holographic nature itself allows freedom of choice, but it does not allow death. As Sally read in the introduction, we are not free to choose a curriculum. We're only free to choose what part we take at what time. We're just not allowed to die. And if we want to die, that seems like hell, because we want to die and we can't. But we're making it our own dream. If nothing else, it's so special because it belongs to me. It's my dream, you can't have it. At least I have that. At least I can hold on to that. You can't be like me, only I can play this part. I was told a number of years ago, do you think you're the only one that can play the part of you? As this series of physical bodies. I think there's a uniqueness, though, that I was given too with this thought, that no, you get to play it the way you want, within reason, within certain parameters. There is free will, there is choice. But ultimately, you've already made the choice to come back. You've already made it when you chose to leave. You made the choice to come back.
Can I ask you something?
Yes.
I wonder where ego is really coming from. Because, we are creatures of God. Our purpose is to choose God over our ego. So how is in this creation ego started? It's like a bad seed somewhere in our creation, because this kind of draws us away, gives us impulse to, forget about love, to kind of live in unreal world. Where is it coming from? What's the source of it?
Well, let me go to a place in here. It'd be a good spot to do it, and then we'll only get this one thing done, but it's going to be enough. I have to find where it is now. It's on page 244 of the text.
paragraph 10?
Yep. And Nicole, if you wouldn't mind reading paragraph 10 on 244.
Okay. You who prefer separation to sanity cannot obtain it in your right mind. You were at peace until you asked for special favor, and God did not give it, for the request was alien to him, and you could not ask this of a father who truly loved his son. Therefore you made of him an unloving father, demanding of him what only such a father could give, and the peace of God's Son was shattered, for he no longer understood his father. He feared what he had made, but still more did he fear his real father, having attacked his own glorious equality with him.
Equality with him. We wanted to be special. Kat, would you like to read the next paragraph?
In peace he needed nothing and asked for nothing. In war he demanded everything and found nothing. For how could the gentleness of love respond to his demands except by departing in peace and returning to the Father? If the Son did not wish to remain in peace, he could not remain at all. For a darkened mind cannot live in the light, and it must seek a place of darkness where it can believe it is where it is not. God did not allow this to happen, yet you demanded that it happen, and therefore believed that it was so.
So it did not happen in reality, but we demanded that it happen. So God allowed it to happen in our dream, our illusion. And this is where we are.
Well, so God did not allow this to happen.
Yeah, that's what I said. It didn't.
He said
In reality,
God allowed it to happen, but he didn't have anything to do with it.
It did not.
Created by us.
God did not allow it to happen in reality.
Yeah.
But because we demanded that it happen, God allowed it within our dream, in illusion. And that's where we are.
And that's where the evil is.
I don't even think of God having anything to do with it. I think we just...
Pardon?
I don't even think of God having anything to do with it, allowing, not allowing. I think we just...
Turned her back on time.
We just created our own...
Illusionized
ourselves.
This whole study, we're going back to where we began, to God.
Yeah.
And the ego dissolves.
When we come out of our own darkness.
When you say we just did it, that's God allowing us to do it. That's God allowing us the free will to choose a dream of specialness, is what this is saying.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. But allowing feels like an action, and I don't even think there was action. I think it's just...
You could say he
the
did
results.
not prevent it.
Yeah.
He did not
He
prevent
didn't even, it wasn't even in...
It wasn't even relate to that.
It wasn't,
it's not even
that's right, it couldn't relate to
not
that.
a thing, yeah.
Yeah, there's only love.
Receive it. But then I wonder why this question ever appeared. This request to God to allow it. Why?
Why
is
would
it
you
in
have
our
a
nature
request?
to ask this question?
Well, it's key to me is in this word equality. God created a son by extending it as itself. Gave all that is to another version of itself so that it could interact. And if it's going to do that and have free will itself, it has to give free will to that son. But it will not allow that son to die because in essence, if they're both holographic, God would die. If there is no extension of God, there is no God.
So we're allowed to suffer, but we're not allowed to die.
Well, but we choose the suffering and we blame God for it. That's what we do.
Yeah.
But it's the idea that there is no suffering within the wholeness. Let's go to one other place to try to explain the father and the son situation. Let's go to in the text, page 592. At the bottom of the page, reversing cause and effect.
I had a bookmarker there.
Well, we talked about this just before we left on our little trip here. But let's go back to this. Scott, if you would read that and speak up so Teddy can hear.
Reversing cause and effect. Without a cause, there can be no effects, and yet without effects, there is no cause. The cause a cause is made.
There's too many words there. Shouldn't say the cause made by its effect.
No, it's exactly the way it's supposed to be.
Keep it.
Is it?
The cause a cause is made by its effects. The Father is a Son. The Father is a Father by His Son. Effects do not create the cause, but they establish its causation. Thus, the Son gives fatherhood to His Creator and receives the gift that He has given Him. It is because He is God's Son that He must also be a Father who creates as God created Him. The circle of creation has no end. Its starting and its ending are the same. But in itself, it holds the universe of all creation, without beginning and without an end.
And then the next part of the next paragraph, fatherhood is creation. Love must be extended. A cause is made by its effects. The Father becomes a father by the effect of the Son. By having a son, it becomes a father.
I like the idea that love doesn't mean anything until it's offered to something else. You know, it's just nothing.
It's just shit. Yeah, it's there.
But as soon as you offer love, then the expansion is the expression of love. So it can't be kept secret or kept to self.
You have to share.
It has to share. Thank you.
If you would like the course to give more credence to what you just said, Jim, you could read the paragraph on page 129 if you'd like, in the text.
I could do that. I could almost do it. There you go.
There you go.
Unbelievable belief?
The unbelievable belief at the bottom of page 129.
What we have said that without projection there can be no anger. But it is also true that without extension there can be no love. These reflect a fundamental law of the mind, and therefore one that always operates. It is the law by which you create and were created. It is the law that unifies the kingdom and keeps it in the mind of God. To the ego, the law is perceived as a means of getting rid of something it does not want. To the Holy Spirit, it is the fundamental law of sharing, by which you give what you value in order to keep it in your mind. That's powerful. You give what you value in order to keep it in your mind. To the Holy Spirit, it is the law of extension. To the ego, it is the law of deprivation. It therefore produces abundance or scarcity depending on how you choose to apply it. This choice is up to you, but it is not up to you to decide whether or not you will utilize the law. In other words, it's going to happen. You better decide. Every mind must project or extend because that's how it lives. And every mind is life. Wow.
So, we've reached the end of our time period here, and I want to thank you again for being here and allowing us to review some things that we haven't reviewed for a while.